Hi, everybody. I want to thank all of you for staying around and listening to the Q&A because I thought the movie was absolutely fabulous, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to be able to ask some questions. I hope that this answers maybe some questions or perhaps puts them into words that you, the audience, was feeling at the same time. So my first question has to do with the background of the film and how, Cindy, it came to be that you made the film. I was very taken by the 2013 presentation that Pat and Barb did at the community college in Northern California. And I couldn't quite tell if it was just happenstance that you happened to be there or how all of that came to be. I'm aware of your background in terms of other issues that you've explored on behalf of sexual minorities. And I'm curious as to how this came to your attention, and then you made such an excellent film after that happened. So if you could start by telling us the genesis of the movie, I think we are all interested.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. And thanks to everyone who is sticking around after watching our film. I sure hope you enjoyed it. It was kind of happenstance, or maybe it was more the universe aligning, Emily. I had just screened my first film, Breaking Through, at Sierra College. And these two nice ladies, Barbara Brass and Pat Thompson, came up and hugged me and thanked me and said how lovely it was. And then we went to a reception. And Barb started telling me her story and Pat's story and revealed that Pat had been the one who presided over the board that expelled one of my personal heroes, Colonel Greta Cammermeyer. And I have to admit, I would have just blurted something out. Fortunately, I was eating something, so I almost choked and didn't say anything, but all my 21st century judgment and bravado came to bear. And I thought, how could you possibly? But then the more Barb talked, the more I realized, wait a minute, there's more to this story than what I'm just jumping in and assuming. And so the next night, they told their story. And I was there, camera in hand, of course. And I fell in love with them. And I fell in love with their story because I'm a hopeless romantic, love a love story. And to find out that these two women had been together for so long while they had to pretend they weren't, and all that they went through, I wanted to tell their love story. And yes, it was against the backdrop of no homosexuals in the military, and then it revealed unknown history of Colonel Greta Cammermeyer and how all that came together. And so afterwards, my brain was just going and going, and afterwards I went up to them and I said, Barb, I want to tell your story. And she said, oh, okay, that's nice. And I said, no, you don't understand. I want to tell your story for real. And she was like, oh. So, the conversations then began by phone and email and whatnot. And they agreed to give us full access and the rights to their story for a certain period of time. And then they became, just tremendous, tremendous allies in making this film, just a filmmaker's dream. And as we were developing that, we knew we had to include Greta's story because unfortunately so few people who are 50 years or younger, or even those who are older, but especially those who are 50 and under, do not know what it was like before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, let alone this thing called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so we had to relay some of Greta's story. And in doing that, I got to know more about her, the person, and how all this played together. And so when I asked them to sit down together for the very first time, they'd never talked about their individual experiences of the case with each other, the military court case, we were flabbergasted. They were so gracious and just had this lovely conversation, and they allowed my film partner, Mike Bruno, and I to film this and to bear witness to history being done in the making.
It was, I think, the moment where the two colonels, which is how I've been referring to Greta and Pat in my head. If I can call you by your first names for the rest of this, I will. But I thought that was such an extraordinary moment. And I was wondering if you two could comment on sort of the emotional range that you were feeling not only in that moment, but when Cindy, I take it was Cindy who first suggested that you have this conversation that you had never apparently had. I take it that and I also, if you'd comment on this, that at the Barbara Streisand, when you see the celebration afterwards for your movie, or the movie about you, it's not your movie, I know Glenn Close played you, but that when you see that, it's more of a reception time, and I didn't know if there was any coming out by Pat during that, or sort of if that was just more celebratory for the cameras, and then the real heart stuff was in the film moment that we saw. So if you could comment on both of those things in your answers, I'd appreciate it.
Well,
Either Greta or Pat.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was happy to have a chance to talk with Greta because I had not had a chance to apologize to her and tell her how sorry I was that I had to do that to her. Broke my heart to have to do it, but that was my job. And so I went up there to do it, and I cried all the way to dinner, cried all the way back home. I felt so sorry for Greta after I'd had to take her federal recognition. So thank goodness I had Barb as my support when I got home.
How do you feel now? 1 second, Greta. How do you feel?
How do I feel, or are you
How do you feel now?
Oh,
Yeah, how do you feel now?
Well, I feel a whole lot better, you know, now that we're this far along. And a lot of bridges have been crossed, and I'm feeling pretty good about everything right now.
Greta?
Yes, you mentioned that you'd seen the celebration after Serving in Silence was aired, and that Pat and Barb were there. I had not known that that they were lesbians, or that Pat was lesbian, and found that out sort of by accident when I too was giving a talk at a university at Davis. And Barb came up to me afterwards and handed me a business card that said Barbara Bass and Pat Thompson. And I had this aha moment where, oh my gosh. And that was the first time I knew that Pat was lesbian. And I'm really grateful for that. But to have the opportunity when we went down and the filming of Surviving the Silence was taking place, there was the intensity of sort of describing from my perspective how important Pat's presence was as president of the board, because she had an openness about us being able to present the data and testimony and things that ultimately made the difference when the time came that we appealed this in federal court. So, you know, even though I hated to be discharged, there was also the gratitude in her ability to understand the significance of her presence as president of the board.
So the other thing that, amongst the other things I was wondering was the three, well, certainly Greta, for you first, and then this would also be then for Barbara and Pat. All of you went from a very closeted, very closed existence to this incredibly public view of everybody. Certainly in my generation, Greta, I have to say that for me, you were a hero also. And I still remember being at a march in Washington, a gay and lesbian march in Washington, and hearing you speak. I don't remember the year, but I remember being there distinctly. And for us, you were a hero, and you had gone from my point of view as being a very closeted life of necessity to suddenly being so much in the public view. And now, Barb and Pat, that is happening with you by choice in terms of your desire to tell your story. I don't think with Greta, and I'd like to hear this from you, Greta, I don't think that it was particularly a choice, but that you were thrust into that role of becoming an icon for so many people. And I'm wondering how it feels for you, all of you, to suddenly be from so closeted that you have to build a secret closet door for you to really sort of not only kicking open the door, but kicking open the door in an incredibly public way for you, Greta, and in an incredibly public way for Barb and Pat now, many, many years later. But for you, Greta, it was more contemporaneous for what was going on. So if you could comment on was it like a light switch flipping? Was it hard? You know, what has it been like for you?
Well, you have to sort of step back to what society was like 25 years ago. And we all sort of lived in fear of losing our careers, which of course I did. But I think for me, I really thought that the government and the president would overturn the ban against homosexuals in the military, because after all, here I was, a colonel, I'd been in Vietnam, it was just all of these things in terms of my resume. So I had the delusion of grandeur that that would be sufficient to see the error of their ways, and that they would overturn the existing regulation against gays serving in the military. And when I was then discharged from the military, I was devastated because it had been my life and career for over 30 years, or 25 years by that time. And then as the issue became more public, then it really became my responsibility to continue to speak out on behalf of the thousands who were serving in the military and did not have an opportunity to sort of self-identify, because we had been sort of put into a pigeonhole of who we were by someone who didn't know us in terms of society as a whole. So then it became a responsibility. And as long as people were willing to listen, I felt it my responsibility to continue to talk.
Barb, Pat?
And I'm so glad you did. We knew you were doing a lot of speeches, and you certainly have been our hero, Greta, for ever since that time. And we have always appreciated all that you did for our community in particular. And I cannot tell you how much I hated going up there to do that, but was glad when it was over, and I was again really sorry about that. But
the question you mentioned about us being thrust into the public eye, nothing at all like Greta was. I mean, just minuscule. We're in the public eye of our local community, mainly because I started a resistance group on Inauguration Day. And that has thrust us into a very small local public eye. And people in our district, congressional district, our town, people who are on our side, essentially, who are the resistors and the people who are involved in the Democratic Party here, they know us and they respect us and they care about us. And I'll tell you, we feel that has made a huge difference in making a difference with our community. So that's where I feel that's where we are getting some type of recognition and a lot of respect. And until the most recent events of this year with the COVID-19, we have been everywhere doing everything, and everybody knows that about us. And in part of that, we were sharing our story. We were always out with wherever we were in the most recent years. And I think that has made a big difference in our community, to know that some of the leaders in this movement, in the resistance movement, are two out lesbians who are married and proud. So that's kind of where we come from. But as far as public eye, it's a tiny eye.
But that tiny eye, though, was certainly cast upon you in a negative light by the fellow during the movie who was objecting to your presence and who essentially was gay baiting you. And I was very taken by at the veterans when there's the scene of Pat talking with the veterans. And I was wondering, especially because of how you had mentioned during the movie about the neighbor, you know, when you said that you were sisters. So I was wondering if there has been a change within the neighborhood for how they view you, and how the veterans, when you go and speak to the veterans, what their reaction is to your not only sexual orientation, but the obvious love between the two of you that shines through everything.
Well, the neighbors, that's an interesting thing, because today, well, within the last few years, we don't know all of our neighbors. We hardly know any of our neighbors, but we put this sign, which I'm sure you've all seen around the country. Is that clear enough? You know,
Yes.
Our country. Well, we put that on our gate a couple of, like 3 years ago. And one of the couples who moved into the house directly across from us, met them a year or so ago, and they said one of the reasons we decided to buy this house and move in here was because we saw that sign, and we would be happy here with like-minded people. And they're a straight couple who just thought that that's the kind of neighborhood they wanted to live in. So that really made an impression on me. And that has changed my and our perspective about our neighborhood, because I think they understand that we are caring about humanity, whether they know any details about our life or not. And we have neighbors on the other side next door to us who we came out to them like the minute we met them, because that's just how it needs to be. And it wasn't so direct as, hey, we're your lesbian neighbors. It was just a matter of course, a matter of conversation, just easy, gentle, and they are special people as well. So that's how I feel about our neighborhood. And I would actually like to get to know more of the people who live here now. And maybe once this is moved along and we can get outside again, we might do that intentionally.
Great. And at the veterans, when you were speaking recently at the veterans, Pat, what has their reaction been?
Well, we spoke recently at SMUD.
You're talking about the veterans when you talk.
Yeah, there were veterans in that gathering, and we were very well received. They came up and wanted pictures afterwards, wanted hugs. We could give hugs then yet. And so I just felt really good about how well we were received that day. But other than that, we're not in touch with a lot of veterans, unless it is with speaking engagements.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, is now that, for the moment, don't ask, don't tell is going on. And for the moment, there is protected open service, both requirements as well as active recruiting, I believe. That's part of my question. Are any of you contacted, this goes a little bit to what Cindy was talking about before, are you ever contacted by either lesbians, gay men, transgendered, other sexual minorities who are in the military now and are seeking advice from some elders, or are just sort of wanting to talk? And are you ever contacted by anybody who is actively wondering if they should serve in the military? And if so, terrific. And if not, what would you tell them? What would your message be to them?
Well, I know one major who got off active duty because she did not want to serve under this administration. I also know a couple of lesbians who were married, and they are serving in Hawaii, and they tell us that they are treated as any heterosexual couple. So we like hearing that.
Can I, Emily, I want to add something to that. I was with, well, Greta too, and Barb and Pat at the American Veterans for Equal Rights Conference a couple years ago. And it was so heartwarming and just incredible to me to see these young men and women in uniform who were coming up to them and thanking them for their service and asking for their advice. Their spouses were talking and partners were talking with Barb about what her experience had been like and any advice that she had. You know, so they're being very, very modest, I have to tell you. They're much more broadly known than what they're letting on. You know, they've been in the newspapers, they've been on different television programs, and that's been in the last several years. But so I think they are more role models than maybe they admit or that they realize at this point. And even being with them at other non-veterans related events, to see young men and young women, business folks, come up to them and want pictures with them because they just intuitively sense that, hey, there's something really special here about a couple that was able to stay together, you know, for 36 years now, I guess, and, you know, made it through all those dark days before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and came out the other side. And that's one of the other reasons why I just felt like we needed to share their story, because that's something that we don't often see. You know, we hear about the men and women in uniform. We hear, fortunately, about Greta Cammermeyer's story. Now we hear about Pat's story and her role behind the scenes of supporting what Greta eventually would do. But we don't often hear about the partners, the spouses, who had to sacrifice as well. And that's one of the things for me that I was really intrigued with, was how did Barb, who was hardwired to be out front and to contribute and to create, how was she able to set aside who she wanted to be in the world in order to be with somebody that she loved? And, you know, the way that she created a home so that Pat, when she was there, could relax and could feel safe and could be supported and could do the hardest thing when she faced her own moral dilemma, knowing that she had the support. What do you call it, Barb? The 312 infantry support, or
Support group, right? Yeah.
yeah, the 312 support group. You know, and so one of the other things too, Emily, that was so amazing to me was that Barb did not become resentful of Pat. You know, it would have been so easy to say, oh, well, because of you, I can't live my life fully. But she didn't. And to me, that is really love. It's not, you know, the nice, romantic, soft, sweet kind that we sometimes think about as love, but that was fierce love. You know, the kind of committed love. And, you know, anybody who knows Barb, and as you've seen the film, you've no doubt seen that Barb is fierce. And that's the kind of love I think that is called for in this moment. If we're going to keep moving forward during, you know, the quarantines and then after the quarantines, to help get our country back on the moving towards equality track that we had been on for a couple minutes.
A couple of minutes. That actually almost brings me to my last question, but I do want to ask Greta if she wants to chime in here. And Greta, can you tell us what you did after you were reinstated? Did you go back and serve in the military, or what was the, in just a sentence or two, what was the rest of the story there regarding your military service?
Well, I was reinstated. I couldn't find my uniform because my son had used it for fishing, so I had to get that back first. Because the AG in Washington State called to say that I had never been discharged, even though I had been out for 25 months. I went back, and it was, you know, I felt very uncomfortable, and because all of a sudden everybody knew that I was a lesbian, and it was a time when, you know, you just didn't talk about that. And so I was quite uncomfortable, and yet realizing that I needed to make a stand and a statement that the military in and of itself was a fine place to work and to be, and I was very proud of it. And I got a standing ovation from my unit personnel when I went back for the first time. And, you know, so I stayed on for another year of active, and then went into the inactive reserves and was discharged from that after 31 and a half years.
I'm getting to my last question, but first I have to make a very slight speech. And that is that, Pat, I happen to be an attorney. And what I want to say to you is that I think that oftentimes we are presented in life with what seem to be choices where there is no good outcome for us as individuals. And when I first started practicing law in 1979, I came out to everybody, including the jailers, and I was a public defender, and there was some personal risk in doing that, but I really thought that I just felt that there was no choice in terms of that issue. Doesn't mean I came out to the judges. And there would be a time when I would pick and choose where I would coming out, and it felt like a battle every single time. And was I hired to be pursuing my own agenda, or was I hired to be pursuing the agenda of my client? So I so viscerally felt your moral dilemma in terms of how you were feeling at the time. But for whatever this is worth, there were two things that I took away from the movie the most. And one of them was, sorry, did I lose you? There we go. That it doesn't matter how old you are in terms of your ability to become politically active, and it doesn't matter, and you can tell I'm trying to turn off my phone, this is very embarrassing, and that it doesn't matter what your age is in terms of your ability to both kick open a door that has perhaps been closed to you for many, many years, and it doesn't matter your age to become politically active openly as opposed to being politically active quietly. And I was so taken by two women in my age group standing out there on the street every Tuesday and Thursday. And I just want to thank both of you for your bravery and for moving to the next step. And Greta, like I've already said in terms of showering praise, you were one of my heroes to begin with anyway.
That's Patsy.
So apart from my own little speech, for which perhaps I apologize because there is no particular question attached to it other than a ringing phone, but my last question is, we are in perilous times, and Cindy was just alluding to this. And I think that we're in both perilous times, both politically and scientifically, in terms of the disease, and politically in terms of the president.
Yes.
So, and not only just the president, but everything the Republican agenda stands for. And I think I'm throwing my cards on the table here when I say these things. So my question is, and I think that this would be for the audience, is that in terms of the takeaways, the three of you have lived through a lot. And in terms of the takeaways, it's a two-part question. It's, what is the best thing, or what would you advise to the extent that anybody can, to get through this disease period of time with both sanity and health intact, without losing hope? And then what is the thing that we can do to preserve the gains that you all fought so hard for at great personal expense, the three of you, to make sure that we can keep those gains as we go forward into the next century, hopefully. So that is my question. And I would appreciate answers from anybody on that topic.
I don't think that there's any choice that we need to be politically active, that we need to vote, and we need to vote all the way down the ballot so that both locally and on a national level in the House of Representatives, in Congress, if we don't get a Congress that will act in the best interest of the nation, then we will really continue to slide downhill. And you can't stress enough the importance of of political involvement and supporting our candidates, even if you don't agree with everything that someone stands for. You know, we already know what the alternative has been, and it has taken this country down to the septic tank. And so we have that opportunity to do that both on a local and on a national basis. And I mean, that's really all there is in terms of being able to preserve what we have and then to be able to build on that and move forward.
Very well said.
Well, I agree that
Yes.
and what I do now, even though I'm happy doing my yard work and my projects and making masks on my sewing machine, I mean, I love this time for myself because I wasn't born to be I'm actually, if anybody would believe it, I'm really an introvert and I like my time alone and I thrive on it. So I'm getting that now. I don't like the reason for it, but in the back of my mind and with my notepad next to me, I think of what signs am I going to be making for when we're back out on the street again. If it is after November, maybe we won't have to be back out on the street
Yeah.
again.
Amen.
That's what I'm hoping for. And we get the right resolution to this election that's coming up. Then I will be doing what I'm doing now happily forevermore. And then, well, the activism with the film and maybe a book that we've been struggling to write for the last 5 years is going to keep pushing me forward to keep sharing, educating, acknowledging that we're not finished by any means for our struggle and the struggle of every other marginalized group that there is in our world. So that's where my heart lies. I'd rather be doing gardening and doing my artwork, but I will be out there when I have to be and can be and will be. And that's kind of where I come from. So maybe I'll get enough during this time of sequestration and I'll be ready to get out back on the street again. But at this moment, I am fine being home with the doors locked.
You know, it's
Wait,
Go ahead,
Pat wants to say something. One sec, Pat.
I just wanted to say that we have to keep supporting our trans brothers and sisters because they're having a lot of problems right now.
We have friends through PFLAG, and this was a part of the question about military. We know a family who has a transgender female to male son who was interested in joining the military. I think he's maybe 30-ish years old. And at this time, after this election, they felt that that was not a good option. So that has had a big impact on that person, that one person we know personally.
Cindy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that really strikes me is how important it is that we take care of ourselves. I mean, it has a new significance now, but that saying when we used to fly of put your own mask on first. And as Barb was talking about, you know, that self-care that is so important. And I think for some of us, many of us, we are being able to take a beat, take a breath, and provide that. And however, I think it's so important for everyone to realize there's something that they can do today.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that they can do to be open, to be authentic, and to find a way to change the world. You know, one of my favorite Jewish sayings is tikkun olam, repair the world. And a rabbi friend of mine reminded me a couple years ago, we may not finish the work of perfecting the world, but that's no reason we're not off the hook for starting. We have to do what we can do. And as we've just heard, you know, there's a psychic toll, a price that's paid emotionally when people have to live in hiding and they have to pretend, and all that Barb and Pat and Greta went through to come out the other side and to still be of service is just remarkable to me. You know, I think they would have had every right to say, you know what, I've done my part. I've helped repeal this horrendous policy in the US military. But no, they're still here. They're doing whatever they can do to help. And they're to the point of sharing their stories, even, you know, Greta for the umpteenth time, sharing her story again. Barb and Pat, who have now probably told it just a couple thousand times and who are writing a book and continue to share it so that other people can be inspired and realize, you know, I can take one step forward towards being more open, towards being more authentic. And so I think that that's what we need to all strive for. And, you know, just in closing, I'd just like to say that, you know, sometimes people say, you don't want to meet your heroes, but I'm so glad that I did, because they've exceeded anything that I could have ever possibly thought about them and about their humanity that they bring to our world.
I think I very much appreciate what everybody has said. And as a non-military person, I think there is something else that the rest of us can do. And that is, I think that we can support our gay and lesbian and transgendered and other sexual minorities and every other form of minority in the United States military. Whether we know somebody or not, I think that we can be out there in terms of any organizations that there are, in terms of any way in which we can just say, we support you, we want you to serve, and we appreciate your service. Because I don't think that they hear that a lot from the rest of the world. So Cindy, if I can give you one suggestion, it would be to put on your website, because I think this is an excellent movie, and I think that a lot of people may get the opportunity to see it, is if there is such an organization, is that if there's a way you could add that in the website, or Greta, I know you have your website and your blog, I've seen it, and Pat and Barb, when you're out there, is if there is such an organization, I would like to know it, because I would send an email. I'm in my house all day anyway, and it would be one small thing that I can do to make something better. And Cindy, when you were doing the quote before, that's actually by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, is who first made that quote. And the other thing that is in the teachings in the Jewish tradition is that if it's one small thing, it's still one small thing. But the thing is to do it, just not to think, oh, it was too small, it didn't really matter. And that would be something that your viewing audience could do. And I would just make that small suggestion, and I would be glad to be the first person, if I get that information, to go ahead and just send an email or just send a greeting to somebody that says, we know you're there and we support you. And with that, I want to thank you all very much for being involved in the Q&A. I want to thank the entire Ashland Independent Film Festival crew for continuing on with this festival at a time when it was very hard to pivot. They got right on it, and they've given us this wonderful opportunity to see this movie, given me personally a wonderful opportunity to talk to you folks. And I really hope that we come out of this on the other side safer, saner, and stronger. Good night.